Well, we're ready to go into chapter 10. This is very exciting. We're going to be dealing with the future tense verb. But before we do that, let's review what we know about the verb tenses, right? When you talk about a tense in Greek, time is a very small element, right? And the main thing that's being emphasized in the Greek verbal system is something called verbal aspect. Is the way the speaker is choosing to present the action. Is it being presented progressively without attention to the beginning and ending, the unfolding of the action? Or is it looking at the action as a whole, including the beginning and ending? Or is the completion of the action assumed and we're looking at the ongoing state that's resulted from the action or the relevance of that action for something that's being discussed, right? That's called the verbal aspect, and we also sort of colloquially said we could call this the progressive perspective or the holistic perspective or the stative perspective, looking at the ongoing state. The technical term for these are perfective aspect. Perfective aspect looks at the action as a whole. Imperfective aspect looks at it as it is unfolding, and the stative aspect looks at the ongoing state or relevance that has resulted from a past action. Let's chart out, because we're English speakers, right? We like thinking about past, present, and future maybe more than the Greeks did. So let's think about the past, the present, right? The present and the future. And let's think about what we've already learned, right? We learned the present active indicative and the present middle passive indicative paradigm, right? We learned luo, we learned luomai, and both of those paradigms refer to progressive action in the present time frame, right? I am loosing, or for luomai, I am being loosed, or I am loosing for myself, right? Notice there are two paradigms, again, an active paradigm and a middle passive paradigm. We've learned one past tense so far. We learned the imperfect past tense, so we learned the imperfect active indicative paradigm, and we learned the imperfect middle passive indicative. So very similar to the present in that there's an active paradigm and there's a middle passive paradigm. And context makes clear which one it is. So for the imperfect active, we had eluan, and then all the forms after that. For the imperfect middle passive, we had eluamain, and all the forms after that, right? Translated, I was loosing, or I was being loosed, or I was loosing for myself, right? Those are and what those are, just like the present, progressive past action. So progressive action in the past, I was loosing, versus progressive action in the present, I am loosing, right? I am loosing, I was loosing. What about the future? Well, the future looks at the action, it would seem, against some people think the future is aspectually vague, right? Non-specific. Of the different indicative verb tenses, this one is probably the one that has the highest highlighting of time, because there is a undeniable sort of future expectation element to it. But I think probably we're correct to view this future as holistic, sort of viewing the action as a whole, including the beginning and the ending and everything in between, unless there's some other modifiers that lead us elsewhere. What's interesting about the future as well is you have, rather than like the present and the imperfect, we have three paradigms, right? So we have a future active indicative paradigm, we have a future middle indicative paradigm, and we have a future passive indicative paradigm, right? For the imperfect and the present, it combined the middle and the passive when we were in the present and the imperfect, right? Let me try to say that again, because I think that was a little unclear. The present has a middle passive paradigm. The imperfect has a middle passive paradigm. The future has a distinctively middle paradigm and a distinctively passive paradigm, okay? So there are three memory paradigms for this chapter as opposed to two memory paradigms in the imperfect and the present chapter. However, there's lots of good news with the future. You are going to love the future. I really predict this. Isn't that fitting to predict that you're going to love the future, because the future is so bright you got to wear shades, right? The future can really be summarized with the letter sigma. Oh, it's so beautiful. It is. Now remember, don't forget, we have a song that you can be singing to review the active verb endings, okay? This is the paradigm of the future. Notice the singular, plural, first, second, third person like you're used to seeing. What do you see there that's similar? Oh, this is so good. You got your stem, right? No augment, because augment means past time. Oh, look at this. You got your regular endings. Just that O, ace, a. You can sing them. Amen, eta, usen. Oh, look at this. There's only one little difference. Just inserted down in there is a sigma all the way throughout. Sigma, 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 sigma. Man, that's awesome, right? I will loose, you will loose, he will loose, we will loose, y'all will loose, they will loose. That is beautiful. You basically, again, you really already know the future. Just insert that sigma like a z. Just drop it down in there, zap it down in there, and there you go, right? You're like, yeah, I know, but you told me there's not only the future active, right? This is the future active indicative. You told me there was a future middle and a future passive, so I'm scared of those. Well, don't be scared. Look, here's the future. Here's the future middle. Please note, this is only middle. This is future middle indicative because there's a distinctively future passive paradigm, okay? Different from the present and the imperfect where they shared a paradigm. Oh, this is good too. Look at this. We have our stem, loo, 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 loo. And then remember the story of the guy with the tie? Oh my, hey, a tie. A Methodist on the tie. Oh my goodness, that's exactly the same endings. The only difference is the insertion of the sigma. Notice the translation here is only middle. I will loose for myself, you will loose for yourself, he will loose for himself, we will loose for ourselves, y'all will loose for yourselves, they will loose for themselves. Okay, so if a verb, for example, paruamai is a middle-only verb, it will follow this paradigm, or it will also follow the paradigm of the future passive. Basically, middle-only verbs have for the future have two possible paradigms to follow to communicate the same thing. If a verb's lexical form ends in omai, it will always follow middle or passive paradigms communicating a middle idea. I'll say that again. If a verb's lexical form ends in omai, it's a middle-only verb. It will always follow middle or passive paradigms communicating a middle idea. Okay? So now we've looked at the future active indicative. Good news. We've looked at the future middle indicative. More good news. You're a little scared. Can the good news continue? I think it's not bad news. Okay, it's a little bit trickier, but not bad news. So we have loo, loo, loo. We have the stem all the way through there. Look at that. Look at our ending. Oh my, the story of the tie. A tie. A Methodist on the tie. Oh yeah, that's not too bad. The only difference, rather than inserting a sigma, is inserting a thase all the way through. Thase, 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 thase. Right? So if we build it, right, it's loo plus the sound morpheme thase, right? Or because it's going to be followed by another letter, we'll write it that way, thase, plus the middle passive endings we're used to, right, from the present, oh my. So it's just the insertion of the thase there to make this the future passive. This is the future passive indicative paradigm. Only passive, because there's a distinctively middle paradigm. Notice the translations here, only passive. I will be loosed, you will be loosed, he will be loosed, we will be loosed, y'all will be loosed, they will be loosed. However, as I mentioned, if you have a verb like paruamai, or decomai, or apokrinomai, these verbs that end in omai will follow both middle and passive endings, still just conveying a middle idea. No difference in meaning, whether it follows the middle paradigm or the passive paradigm. So one memory device I've told students in the past is when you see a word and there's a theta that's inserted, not part of the lexical form, not part of the spelling of the word, a theta has been inserted. It looks kind of like a big recliner, doesn't it, or a big beanbag? Somebody's kicking back there. They got their remote control. They're watching Netflix all day. They're feeling extremely passive, right? So when you see that theta, just think to yourself, passive, passive. And it will alert you, hey, this is a passive form. And soon we're also going to see a form like this that's going to have a theta and an augment. This is going to be an aorist passive because it refers to past time. This has no augment and has a theta. This is a future passive. All right, so now you're kind of getting excited. You sort of say, hey, this future is not too bad. I'm gonna try this out. So, for example, with the verb akuo, you say, I think I can make the future of this. Akuso, akuseis, and so I will hear, bam, I'm like, yeah, awesome. How about the future of pistuo? Pistuso, I will believe, pistu salmon, we will believe. This is awesome. I just drop a sigma in and I'm making the future all over the place. I say, let's try it with Pimpo. And you're like, no problem. The future is Pimpso. Yeah, I will send. And I say, You're like, what? I just did the same thing. This is wrong. What's the correct form, Dr. Plummer? You're hurting me. It's Pempso. Notice how those letters combine to be a ps. So occasionally with the future, because we're adding in that sigma, it's going to result in some combinations with other consonants, okay? It's going to result in some combinations with other consonants. Bill Mounts has really helpfully summarized these possible combinations in what is called the square of stops. See, it's 3 by 3. 1, 2, 3 by 1, 2, 3. So it's a square, and it looks at the way these consonants combine with the sigma to result in this. So these things are added to a sigma, added to a sigma, added to a sigma, and they result in this. Now you're going to be reading the other direction. You're going to be reading a word, and it's going to have this, and you're going to have to say, I bet a sigma was combined here to result in a ps or a x, or there's the sigma itself, right? So you're the detective, and you're looking at how it is already combined. But let's try to slow down and look at this in a little bit more detail. Okay, so these are called stops because they're in a broad sense consonantal stops. It's a classification for a sound that you make in your mouth. And let's look first at these sounds that are made with your lips. They're labeled as labials. They're called labials because they're made with your lips. And I want you to say them and to pay attention with what your mouth is doing when you say this. Say puh. Make that sound and just consciously pay attention to what your lips are doing. Say puh. Say buh. Do you see how it's made in almost the same way? Say fuh. Notice how it's made with your lips. The difference is, and you can put your hand on your throat if you want, is how much your voice box is vibrating. Is your voice box not vibrating? Is your voice box vibrating? Or is air still coming out of your mouth? That's whether the consonant is unvoiced, voiced, or aspirated. So again, put your hand on your throat and pay conscious attention to what your lips are doing as you do this. Say puh, puh, buh, buh, fuh, fuh. Do you see how all those, like maybe on the example of Pimpo, you can say, yeah, I can see, I see that pi and sigma together. That obviously makes the psa sound. But I don't see exactly that being psa, and I really don't see that being psa. But if you slow down, I think this is where this chart's helpful. You slow down and you see these consonants are first cousins, right? They are made in the same place in your mouth. So we're expecting them to behave in the same way. And actually, we're going to see them changing out for each other sometimes in weird forms. You'll be reading and you'll expect a pi and there'll be a phi. You'll be like, where did that come from? Well, if you understand that they are first cousins, these consonants are first cousins, we're not surprised to see them change out for each other, and we're not surprised when we add a sigma that they all behave in the same way and end up being ps, psi, or psi, right? Again, don't forget, you're going to be working the other direction. You're reading a word that has a psa, and you think to yourself, I bet a sigma was added in here to make the future. Okay, let's look at the palatals, or sometimes they're also called velars. And these consonants are made when the back of your tongue hits the top of your mouth. Okay, these are made when the back of your tongue hits the top of your mouth. So we start with the kappa, and I want you to, again, you can put your hand on your throat and think about how this sound is being made in your mouth. Say k, k. Do you sort of the back of your tongue sort of hitting the top of your mouth, your soft palate, right? K. Then say g, g, k, k, right? K, g, k. I mean, they're all really made in the same place, so we're not surprised that they all combine to be ks, right? Now, that's easier to see as ks, isn't it? It's like very transparent. Ks. This is not as hard This one's more difficult. Gz, and then this one I think is a little bit either x. But all of these consonants, they're first cousin consonants. They behave in the same way, and they end up combining with the sigma to be x. Okay, let's do the dentals. These are consonants that are made when your tongue hits the back of your teeth, your dentals, right? So you can put your hand on your throat, and you can feel your throat. You can feel it, the voice box either not vibrate, or you can see that air is still coming out of your mouth as an aspirant consonant. So let's do these. Say t, right? T, duh, duh, right? Your tongue is going forward and hitting your teeth. T, duh, th, right? And if you think about it, and you're reading along, and you have a t plus a sigma, t, s, it's like shifting from first gear to fourth gear. It's not easy to do with your mouth. You want to add a vowel in, or you want to drop something off. So the Greeks, what they did, they just dropped. That's hard to say. It's hard to say a dental right next to a sigma. Most spelling changes in languages can be explained by the laziness of the human tongue. If something is harder to say, we have a tendency to shift towards the easier way, to drop letters out, to add vowels. And this is what happened in the Greek language. The dentals were dropped out when a sigma was added into the future, and so you end up with just a sigma. So the sigma is marking the future, and you may, again, you're reading it the other direction. You may wonder, where did my dental go? Well, it was hard to say, and so it was dropped out. I think this square of stops is really a great way to see some logic behind the commonality of these changes, and I hope it's helpful to you. One final thing we see in this chapter, we see the future form of me, right? We learned the present form of me. We learned the imperfect form of me, right? Amain, ace, ain. Now we're going to learn the future. Now we know all the indicative forms of me. We have a present pattern, we have an imperfect pattern, and now we're going to have a future pattern. This is called the future indicative of me. It follows middle endings, but technically the verb me doesn't have an active, middle, or passive voice. It's a stative verb. It refers to ongoing existence. So it's best parsed as a future indicative, and you really don't give a voice, though we are noting that it follows the middle endings, right? It follows those o my, a tai endings. Let's look here and see that most of these forms can be explained by having this little sound unit s plus our o my, a tai, and so on. So look at these endings. O my, a. Now the only difference here, is missing the epsilon. It's not s-a-tai, it's just s-tai, but all the other ones are regular. Amatha, estha, antai, right? The story of the guy with the tie, and then we have s on the beginning. And the only variation from that pattern is right here in the third person singular. There is no epsilon there. It's not etai, it's just tai. So this is not a hard pattern to learn. S-o-my, I will be. S-a, don't ever forget your Yoda subscript. S-a, you will be. S-tai, he will be. S-amatha, we will be. S-s, the y'all will be. S-antai, they will be.